Well, it's the Halloween video, when we always like to cover the spooky and mysterious monsters in fiction, and pumpkins that one time. Surely after doing this for 11 years, we've run out of monsters. What's left?
I don't even know why we're here anymore. There's nothing left to talk about. No Halloween spooks left to share. Unless I have a memory of a black and white film of a creature from the swamps. Oh, that's gonna be giving too much away.
You're not surprising anyone. They already read the title. You can just say it's swamp monsters.
Wait a second. Swamp. I'm getting a memory. What about swamp monsters? That's been a thing, right?
Well, we did do a list on aquatic monsters in 2017, so there might be a couple of monsters that overlap, but most of the monsters on that list were non-swamp guys, like Scylla or the Kraken, and the swamp is the spookiest of the bodies of water, so I think those types of monsters deserve their own Halloween list. Basically, these monsters have to have a swamp aesthetic to them. They can live there, they can be made of swamp material, or they can just fit the vibe. Sometimes you just see a monster and think, yup, that lives in a swamp. And joining me is the master of biological formations in nature, NegetiveX.
I think before we go forward, we really need to define what a swamp is. A swamp is a fresh body of water with a lot of greenery in there. You got trees, you got vines, you got moss. It has to be thick, and preferably the water has to be a little dirty. I don't want any crisp water. I want that lake water. It's gotta have a little bit of grime in it, you know, to really give the swamp texture. Without that, you're just hanging out at the beach. Nobody wants that, except for 90% of the population.
And also joining is our resident swamp dweller, ButIGoByGoose.
I don't know, beaches are too clean for me. That's why I live in a swamp.
Now, let's sink into the top 10 swamp monsters. Number 10, Man-Thing from Marvel Comics. Man-Thing was one of those characters I was aware of in Marvel since those pure brute force character designs have always stuck out to me, but he was never prominent in mainstream Marvel media, so it seemed like Marvel just pulled him out whenever they needed a big monster man on either side of a struggle. His general backstory is, he used to be a biochemist from Nebraska named Ted Salas. He was working on making an imitation super soldier serum similar to what Captain America used, but he was betrayed by his lover and the organization he was working with. In a last-ditch effort to escape, he destroys his notes, uses the serum for protection, and manically drives away, but he crashes into a swamp near the Florida Everglades where he was working. With the imitation serum in his body, it combines with the gooey materials of the swamp, turning him into the Man-Thing. And from here on out, he's randomly in plot lines that need a near-impervious brute force guy. He's got strength, regeneration, immortality, speed, he's the full package, until the writers need him to lose. Like X-23 Wolverine fights him, and no matter how much he cuts, he's like, calm down, it's just gonna grow back. Even when it seems like fire is a weakness for him, he just has so much mass that he can tank it out until he can extinguish it properly. The only letdown to me about Man-Thing is his human side rarely comes into play. He lost all his memories, and it's not a Hulk situation where he can switch on and off to the human form or the human mentality. Ted is basically just a core so Man-Thing can exist. It explains why Man-Thing still has basic understandings of human interaction, and opens up the potential for him to remember his past life, but all things considered, Ted is dead.
So he can collect that sweet life insurance bonus? Just imagining the adjuster coming out and be like, well, I understand you're in quite a predicament, but technically you're not dead, so we're gonna go ahead and retain this.
Even though Man-Thing is somewhat interchangeable with other monsters in the Marvel Universe, I still like when he shows up. I think it's the design, specifically the head. The tree root tendrils are such a good choice, and they look like they're part cephalopod.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the best thing he's got going for him, is he kind of looks like Cthulhu. But then Cthulhu kind of looks like Cthulhu. Mom, can we get Cthulhu? No, we have Cthulhu at home. This is him.
So go forth, Man-Thing, and just do your thing. Maybe they'll put you in Marvel vs. Capcom someday. Number 9, the Mind Sucker from Dredge. Oh, look at this guy, he's so hungry, he's kinda cute. Watch him eat like that, and no! Okay, he's just restrained. Can we release him and we can watch him eat more, because that was kind of fun. I'm sad now. just talk about the game.
Did you just kill the swamp monster that we were about to talk about? How are we going to talk about this swamp monster if you killed him?
So basically, Mindsucker is a enemy from the game Dredge. So Dredge is an interesting kind of indie game that came out not too long ago. It's basically a Lovecraftian-themed fishing game. The plot, basically is that you're a fisherman, you wake up in a strange town where the previous fisherman has mysteriously vanished, and they need a fisherman, so you start fishing around. As you start fishing, you meet a man called the Collector. He's asking for some weird items from around the world, so you start exploring the world, fishing, catching strange fish, and finding these items. So one of the areas that you can explore is called the Twisted Strand, and the kind of boss monster of the area is called the Mindsucker, which are these giant eel-like creatures that can only detect movement. So as you're moving through trying to catch your fish, you have these eels popping up, scanning the area looking for you. In the end, you end up meeting a crazed military captain, and you end up killing the Mindsuckers by essentially baiting them into traps and blowing them the hell up.
So much for scary. You put down food and watch them die. They don't seem to do anything.
But yeah, I mean, I think the Mindsucker in general is just like the classic definition of a swamp monster. You find it in a swamp, it's big, it's scary, it kills things. Like, what would make a better swamp monster? Some sort of plot where it falls in love with a woman and they, Oh, and the game ends by you essentially end up bringing the end of time, because that missing fisherman, spoiler alert, turns out that was you the whole time. You were in an accident and your wife died in the ocean, and the Collector is just you setting you out to get stuff so you can try to bring her back, and you do bring her back, but also you bring apart the end of the world by summoning some sort of Lovecraftian demon.
It's a bit of a shame though, since he looked kinda cute when he noticed you had food. He does a little head motion like, sustenance, finally, I can eat. But I guess if you have to kill all the fish monsters in this game, it's to be expected.
Honestly, I think it's kind of interesting because of all the major fish bosses that you fight in the games. This is the only one that you actually kill.
What?
All the other ones just get to keep living their lives, doing their stuff, but these guys actually, die.
Oh no, if they're all dead, how are we going to put them on this list?
I'm just gonna go mourn the loss of my potential new swamp fish friend that never was. Number 8, the Swamp Man from Courage the Cowardly Dog. Courage feels like one of those shows we always have to break out on a Halloween list when it has a relevant monster. The swamp monster was from season 4, so I feel like he's not among the notable monsters in Courage. Usually people bring up a lot of the season 1 and 2 villains like King Ramses or Freaky Fred, so I think the Swamp Man is underrated since he appeared close to the end of the series while still having this verbose voice with a sinister air that creates the horror atmosphere of the show. He's got your classic movie monster motive, where he wants to bring Muriel back to the swamp after finding a locket with her picture in it, thinking that she's his swamp woman. So he kidnaps Muriel, and Courage has to find the real swamp woman to save her. The swamp monster's motive may be basic, but I like that his one power is just to scream buildings down. If he goes into your store and asks if you've seen the swamp woman, he will scream until the building crumbles if you don't have the swamp woman available for him at that moment.
I like how positive the newscaster is. It's amazing! This swamp man's destroying everything!
He is making some killer news segments though, so his career is about to skyrocket from here.
I mean, it's kind of like a jerk move, like the town's getting destroyed. He just watched a man's livelihood get destroyed. Sure, the salami was questionably not meat. I will say, I find it very ironic that he says nothing will stop me from getting my swamp woman back, except for the fact he can't recognize the swamp woman, so the only thing stopping him is his own lack of eyesight. Man needs some glasses.
Though he makes up for it with his sense of smell, since when he starts going on his search, he inhales heavily through his nose to get the scent of Muriel/the swamp woman.
I'm kind of curious into the backstory of this guy, because it sounds like his wife left him for some reason. It's like, I won't let you go again. I wonder what he did. What happened in between them?
Well, see, now this guy's starting to seem relatable, because he reminds me of you. He just hasn't showered in a while, and his wife is mad at him because he stinks.
This is the thing we're going with. NegetiveX smells. Is that the theme of this video?
just this one.
Then Courage finds the real swamp woman, who is working for a post office somewhere in a small town in Europe that likes yodeling. Turns out, she just has poor short-term memory and forgot where they lived, then wrote letters but forgot to send them. So Courage reunites them and it's all good. It's funny how fast they wrap up the episode, since as soon as the swamp monster sees Swamp Woman, he looks at Muriel and winces for a second like, oh wait, that's not who I was looking for. Also to note, we learn they have normal human names, names Everett and Catherine, which is an underrated type of joke for me. I always appreciate when you give otherworldly monsters very down-to-earth names. Also just the fact that the Swamp Woman works at a post office with all normal people, and no one batted an eye that she's covered in moss. But this show has the occasional random creature among humans, so maybe it's more standard than I think. Number 7. Salvador Moreau from Resident Evil Village. The reservoir is a swampy area in Resident Evil Village. Out there, you meet one of the inhabitants of this hellish area you're stuck in named Salvador Moreau. When in his more human form, he seems like a harmless dude. He's got tattoos like a normal guy, and you want to know his story. I almost feel bad for him. He looks sickly. But then he goes into full mutated mode, and I can no longer feel bad for him.
I like it because he comes out like a normal dude. Maybe he's got a little bit of a hunchback, but that's okay. And then he's just going away. Goodbye, Salvatore Moreau. You get in that water. So basically, Salvatore Moreau is one of the 4 lords in Resident Evil Village. He was lured into the area and implanted with a Karu parasite. And, you know, he probably had the worst of it of all of them. Like Heisenberg basically becomes Magneto, which is pretty cool. Lady Dimitrescu basically is like a giant bug, which is really cool. But this guy becomes a fishman, which when it comes down to it, fishman is one of the worst monsters that you can actually be. Because all of a sudden, you're limited to the water. Which is why, like, his boss area is so flooded, because he had to keep it full of water so he doesn't desiccate and die. So now he's living his life just eating fishermen. I will say that is pretty ironic. The fishermen come to fish, but they get fished by the bigger fish.
God, all those eyes are so creepy. But wouldn't that be a weakness in some way? Like when Carl was rebuilt with only eyes and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. Every bit of feeling would be so painful on them.
Yeah, I bet it gets dry with all those eyes. Maybe if he had a couple more eyelids, he'd be a little tougher.
Oh, so he's got some interesting powers. He's able to basically secrete mucus to, you know, make barriers that you can't escape from. So, you know, that's a fun ability to have. It's actually kind of sad because, yeah, he just always wanted to make Miranda proud and was the most hated of all of them. Nobody likes him, and then he dies by my hand. I'm sure there's a lesson in this somewhere. I will say, I really do like his boss design, though. I do love the tadpole. Honestly, his design reminds me a lot of the movie The Host. There's like a tadpole monster in that horror film. Like, I think it's got a very similar design, and I think it's really cool.
You know, seeing him defeated, I kinda feel bad for him again. He got the short end of the stick with his transformation. He has no land mobility. Once you deplete all the water in the area, he's just stuck. Poor guy. Number 6, Knockin' from Bramble the Mountain King.
Wait, this guy's name is Napkin?
In this game, you're a boy trying to find your sister, and you have to travel to various environments based on Scandinavian folklore, with bosses of each area based on a monster from said folklore. In the swamp area of the game, all seems fine when you're just taking in the environment. There's a nice rock elevation in the distance, and maybe we can sneak on by with no issues. However, a giant man who likes to play the violin lurks in these waters, and he's angry that you dared interrupt his music time.
Here you go, happily skipping along on this cute little lily pad when out of nowhere the creepiest monster I've ever seen comes out. What was that?
This is a great creepy design. He's human enough where you see all of his human aspects that go uncanny, like his disheveled hair or eyes that match the color of the swamp, and by extension, his whole face is not enjoyable to look at. His skin has the texture of that wet gunk you'd find at the bottom of a lake.
Honestly, I really love this game because it has some incredibly creepy boss monsters. Like, oh, and then I drowned in the lily pad because I'm really bad at platforming. But like, no, it's like, I love this game because it's so bright and it's so colorful and it's so cute. Just intermixed with some of the best horror you'll ever see.
While you mostly just have to outrun him and jump around, his main form of attack are giant sound blasts with his violin, which is his favorite leisurely activity and related to how he became a monster. Just hide behind rocks and such to block the sound and falling debris, and then find a way to put Knackin' in the line of danger.
But yeah, so one thing I really like about this game is that it actually gives you the backstories of most of the monsters that you end up fighting. Basically, Knackin' was a simple man who liked to play the violin. Everyone in town was mean to him, though. There was one girl that was nice to him. But eventually, the town beating him every day became too much, so he learned to play the forbidden melodies. And he made everyone dance until their flesh and bone lagoon wore down and they all died. But unfortunately, he did that to the woman he loved too, so he got so upset that he went to live in the swamp and has been there ever since, drowning people who come by, and he'll actually play the violin to lure people into the lake so he can drown them. Because I don't think he really learned his lesson. He accidentally killed the woman he loved, and now he's like, you know what? What if I keep murdering people? Maybe that'll make it okay.
Maybe he's just trying to learn the fiddle. He's just trying to practice his fiddle skills. People keep accidentally dying. That's not entirely his fault.
It wasn't the forbidden melodies. He was just bad. They kept beating him up to stop him from playing. Just stop it, man. Stop it. And then one day they all died of some unrelated reason, but now he keeps playing it in the swamp. But yeah, you actually do get to kill Nakin in this game. It's actually pretty intense. When he tries to grab you, he basically falls off a waterfall and lands on a rock and breaks his back.
His dumb butt would have lived if he had just done nothing.
Number 5, the creature from the Black Lagoon. I feel you can't have a list like this without the patient zero of swamp monsters. Though being the first of his kind, he's very basic, so he scores a spot in the middle of this list. He's generally considered the last of the classic Universal movie monsters, coming out in 1954, while most of the others came out in the 30s or early 40s, so he's usually behind the other monsters in terms of notoriety. He doesn't even have a monster cereal based around him.
Honestly, his cereal would make the most sense because it could be floating in milk. He swims.
Ew!
Don't ew that. He's a proud man. Imagine all the flavors it could be. Green.
Ew!
Actually, the newer Zombie Girl monster cereal is green, so he can't have that. Since he also came out in the 50s, it was during the boom of sci-fi movie monsters, so he blended in too much in terms of concept, but at least got attention thanks to the effects. The best part of the movie is seeing all the practical effects of the actor in the creature suit and the way they filmed underwater at the time. It's fun to literally watch. They just have a sequence where he scouts out the woman underwater, and I think they only do this so they can show off the costume swimming.
Look, he's trying to grab her toes. He's a man who likes feet.
Honestly, kudos to her. Something's grabbing her feet in the water and she swims right after it. Like, what the hell's going on? If I'm swimming and something's grabbing my feet, I'm getting the hell out of there.
As mentioned, his motive is basic, just wanting to steal a woman after wandering from the swampy lagoon onto land. For a monster design, he's very cool looking, but the creature was always a bit lame to me when looking at his strengths and weaknesses. For positives, if he gets his hands on you, he's very strong. He can just crush you to death like he did with some guys he surprised. But his downfall is that they gave him so many weaknesses. Expectedly, he's slow on land, but he just collapses if out of the water for too long. He can also get captured by a tiny net. It's a net, and it's tiny. Then he's held back by a cage, and when he escapes, he can just be lit on fire.
I don't think he's weak to fire. He's just, like everyone else on this world, a little flammable. Oh, this is more than I bargained for. It's like if I were at a job interview and they asked what my greatest weakness was, I wouldn't say fire. That's implied. We're all a little weak to fire.
When I get asked at job interviews what my greatest weakness is I say fire. Just take a flamethrower to me. That's the only way you're taking me down. Now, I can survive a bullet or two. Just can't survive fire.
Yeah, but I don't know, he's wet. I just think of that as something that should make him immune to fire. This is also a good time to mention he's weak to guns, but that I understand. Also, his name is actually Gill-man, but calling him the creature just felt better to us. The creature got 2 other movies, but I always felt like he was a decade too late since he feels distant from his other monster brethren, and that's not an insult. I feel the mutated creature design from the 3rd movie was another great appearance for him, but looking at this monster's fight for modern relevancy was always a bit disappointing to me. Guys like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, they all got remakes or parodies later on in some form, but every time Gill-man gets a chance, the movie tends to get cancelled. However, he did get The Shape of Water, which might change your perspective on if he's truly a horror monster. Number 4, the Hag from Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is your one-stop shop for an array of fantasy creatures, and of course, they have some swamp dwellers in the game. You can find them in the sunlit wetlands, aka the Putrid Bog. You'll see some lowly tree creatures and some mud demons there, but the boss of the area is the Hag. Hags are creatures in the game who love deceit and suffering, and they use magical items to do such. The specific hag that hangs out in the bog, though, doesn't seem so bad when you meet her earlier in the game. She's just a nice woman named Auntie Ethel, but as you would expect, seeing isn't believing.
Yeah, I mean, Auntie Ethel seems really nice at first. You meet her in the Druid Grove. She tells you that she can't heal you yet, but if you come to her house, she'll be able to help you out. And, there's nothing suspicious about this, so obviously you go.
You trusted her? What is wrong with you? There is a girl not 5 feet away who is paralyzed because of a potion Auntie Ethel gave her.
Well, listen, I don't know, but when you eventually make it down to Auntie Ethel's home, you find a strange situation where Marina is there. Her and Auntie Ethel are fighting about something, and this is where it gets pretty dark, because it turns out Auntie Ethel wasn't trustworthy the entire time. She's actually a hag.
And see, again, they're only random because you didn't do enough of the storylines.
Yeah, I'm as shocked as you are, Goose. It came out of nowhere. So Marina has a really kind of tragic story because her husband died and she really wants him back. So she sold her firstborn child to Auntie Ethel to get her husband back. So she's currently pregnant. So, once you come in and kind of ruin this thing, no matter what happens, Auntie Ethel sends Marina to the basement and you have to go through a long quest to try to rescue her. If you dispatch of Auntie Ethel, you find the item that can bring Marina's husband back to life. Although, because Auntie Ethel's a hag, things go pretty dark. If you bring him back, he ends up being a zombie, and not like a happy zombie, but he's definitely having a bad time. And then you could either give him back to Marina, or take him for yourself. Either way, I decided to wash my hands with this whole situation, said, here's your dead husband, and walked into the sunset a hero. You're welcome. I think Auntie Ethel is kind of a cool character, though, because it does have that kind of undercurrent of something is off throughout the entire time, where you can figure out that things are definitely going poorly. And she kind of has a classic monster witch look to her, She's big, she's green, she's ugly, she has a swamp house.
I like that even after she's not present, her deceitful influence runs deep. The whole keeping her promise of giving Marina her husband back without telling her that reanimating a body doesn't remove the decay and such is such a classic diabolical lying by omission that I would only expect from a master of deceit. I may not like her morals, but she plays the role of a good villain and is swampy to boot. Number 3, Melania, Goddess of Rot from Elden Ring. Welcome to the Lake of Rot, Elden Ring's resident swamp, where the skies are red, the water is red, and the fog is, might not be red. There are plenty of goodies to find around this area, but be wary of the water. While you're free to walk around on it, it can inflict the scarlet rot on you, which does damage over time. However, the monsters in this swamp are quite absent. You mostly have the basilisk, which is an amphibious-like creature that stretches its body and spits out this deadly black smoke. While I thought they were creepy enough to have a spot on this list, they're in about a dozen areas in this game, so they're creatures of the world and not just the swamp. So while I was about to give up on the Lake of Rot getting a rep on this list, my co-hosts directed me towards a different Elden Ring enemy that fits this topic, Melania, Goddess of Rot. While she isn't really monstrous, nor does she reside in the swamp, she one-ups the swamp dwellers by being the originator of the swamp. She is the swamp monster in the sense that she creates it rather than resides in it.
Really, Melania is an ecosystem engineer. She's much like a beaver, except for rot. She not only creates swamps, she has the swamp within her. So Melania is kind of a tragic character because she is cursed because she has the god of scarlet rot inside of her. It's not that she herself creates it, but I guess it's kind of like Naruto with the 9 tails. You got the scarlet rot inside of her, which causes severe pain for her entire life, severe deformation, all of these problems. But what ends up happening is sometimes this power gets released, like during her battle with Radahn where they're fighting. She ends up destroying all of Caelid basically because she blooms and all of the scarlet rot inside of her, all that power gets released, laying waste to that entire area. I'm assuming that's how the Lake of Rot was created as well. It's just during these times of extreme period, she blooms. That's the second phase of the boss fight, when all of that scarlet rot, all that power from the god from inside of her is being released. So while you don't find her in a swamp, she is making the swamps, making her the ultimate swamp monster, because without her, there would be no swamps. She's also just one of the best boss fights that Miyazaki's ever put out, so good on him.
I think he kind of outdid himself this time, where he had so many swamps, he turned one of them into an actual boss fight. She's so hard to get down to because you have to traverse a few swamps to get to her in the first place. So you have to go through Caelid, which is all swamp area that she turned into that while fighting Radon. In phase 2, she has a big Scarlet Aeonia attack, and that Aeonia, the flower, is what creates swamps. Her attacks are literally making swamps.
But basically, every time that she blooms, her rot advances. So during the fight with us, she blooms because we are just too powerful, because we're over-leveled because of the chicken farm. But she blooms when fighting us, releasing more rot all over the place.
And while this may look like a pretty little area, that is technically a swamp. Those flowers are all Aeonian flowers, so that's just going to bloom into more blood rot when it matures.
Alright, you've convinced me. While you don't fight her in the swamp initially, she brings the swamp to you, making any monsters in the vicinity, including herself, into a swamp monster by classification. Number 2, Swamp Thing from DC Comics. So the elephant in the room is, Swamp Thing is very similar to Man-Thing from Marvel Comics. While it seems like one rips off another, it might just be a coincidence based on how closely to each other both came out. Man-Thing's first story was in May 1971, and Swamp Thing was in July 1971. The reason that's been settled on is Man-Thing's co-creator Jerry Conway and Swamp Thing's co-creator Len Wein were both roommates at the time working for different comic companies, and they were both fans of a different comic monster, the Heap, created in 1942, so they were likely talking about the Heap, both got inspired, and it led to different swamp monster men coming out at the same time.
Why isn't the Heap on this list? The Heap is awesome. Look at him.
Regardless, Man-Thing and Swamp Thing both went different directions in life. Swamp Thing had many appearances in movies, TV shows, games, and of course, comics. The origin is pretty similar to Man-Thing, where a scientist was creating a serum to restore biomaterial for food, but when the plant is destroyed by a villain, he gets caught in the explosion, covered in the serum, and escapes in the swamps of Louisiana, mutating into the Swamp Thing. And then he has his various different stories. Initially, he's trying to get his body back while dealing with people who want to disturb the forest or him because they think he can provide immortality. Mainly a scientist named Anton Arcane, who has these minions called the Unmen. These are 80s B-movie monster designs at their finest, and they're basically Swamp Thing's main enemy. They're crazy little guys with random powers. There's no consistency to them. They're all just creepy and weird, but we like them.
Man, we need to bring the Unmen back. The Unmen need their own movie. I'm sure they got a lot going on. Look at that guy. He's just a face and a hand. That's a tough life.
Swamp Thing's modern interpretation is all about protecting the green, being a spirit connected to all plant life in the universe. Anytime someone threatens it, he'll emerge to kick some ass. Whichever person has been turned into Swamp Thing at this point, usually Alec Holland, they've accepted their new duty and he's just a noble guy. Swamp Thing's mainstream notoriety has always been odd to me. He was popular enough in the 80s and early 90s to get 2 live-action movies, a game on the NES, and a cartoon which had a theme song parodying Wild Thing, where they'd sing, "Swamp Thing, you're amazing."
Ah, Swamp Thing, you are amazing.
It's the Swamp Thing. Wow, oh man, I just realized getting into that, I don't know how the song Wild Thing goes, nor have I heard the theme song to Swamp Thing.
Then I don't recall seeing him in anything outside of comics in the late 90s and 2000s, which is when I primarily watched superhero media. It wasn't until the mid-2010s when Swamp Thing had a resurgence outside of comics, appearing in the Justice League Dark movies, getting his own live-action TV series that was canceled after one season, seeing plenty of appearances in the various animated TV series, and being playable in Injustice 2. Swamp Thing was back in the mainstream, and you know what? That's pretty neat. I don't think I would have pursued learning more about Swamp Thing if it wasn't for all this extra material.
Swamp Thing wins.
For number 1, we went with the most notable swamp dweller of a generation. Is he scary? Is he made of the swamp itself? Well, that's up for you to decide. But you know, he's a monster who's an icon and lives in a swamp. Number 1, Shrek. Somebody might not think that this Shrek is a real monster. We ain't the sharpest tools in the shed. His look is kind of fun with his buddies in the sun and the ogre horns on his forehead. Well, if you go back to the first movie, and I don't think we have the creativity to make this a full entry parody of All-Star, but it was a good intro.
Hey, well, wow, Mr. Top 10 List. That made it a cool place, and now it's getting colder. I gotta bundle up, and hopefully someday it'll be better when I'm older.
Yeah, he's got so much to do, so much to see. So what's wrong with taking the back streets?
The swamp is a key area for Shrek. While all the movies have him go on the road, the home base is always the swamp. It has everything he needs. His house is a tree over there. There's an outhouse off to the side that triggers Smash Mouth music. There's a shower with mud so Shrek can keep up his putrid scent. And the titular swamp is where you can do plenty of extracurricular activities like paint or swim.
I think the depiction of the swamp in Shrek is also just incredible. You know, like where he's getting his food from, the slugs swimming around in the mud. Like, it's so visual. It's so visually pleasing.
But heed that keep out sign well, because otherwise he'll yell his most iconic line at you. What are you doing in my swamp?
What are you doing in my swamp?
Now, it feels weird to discuss Shrek's power rankings because everybody knows him and he's not meant to be taking this seriously, but if we had to, it's all in strength for him, and durability, also stench. It generally takes hordes of soldiers or creatures much bigger than Shrek to outmatch him in terms of brute force, but if you're the common man, he can just make soup out of your freshly peeled skin, or squeeze the jelly from your eyes, which I hear is quite good on toast. Also, he can extinguish fire with his spit, which I always thought was cool. Versus magic, though, it's a bit iffy, but never forget he was able to break into the fairy godmothers with a 100-foot gingerbread man.
I mean, I think of all the swamp monsters in the world, Shrek is gonna have the longest lasting impact. Think of all the different Shrek-related things that we have now. We have Shrek video games. We have Shrek movies. We have Shrek on Ice, where Shrek wannabes ice skate around and sing. Like, name another swamp monster that has this type of legacy. Creature of the Black Lagoon wishes that he had this type of legacy. I mean, you know you've made it when you have your own cereal. Man, I can't believe we got a Shrek cereal before we got a Creature of the Black Lagoon cereal.
Oh, you could go all day on Shrek-branded foods. You have multiple cereals, Twinkies with green filling, Burger King deals with sourdough, green ketchup with the essence of Shrek, kid cuisine, ice cream in various forms, and waffles with his face indented on them, just to name a few.
He had waffles? That makes sense, because in the morning we're having waffles. You know, that means that there's probably tamales too, because in the Spanish version, Donkey makes tamales.
Does he? Not waffles?
Yep, not waffles, yeah. Because in Spanish, what is a waffle? Instead, tamales.
In the end, Shrek is someone you can't help but like. He's got 4 movies, 3 of them being rock solid, and he possibly has a 5th movie out based on when you're watching this video. Also, he has those TV specials, including a Halloween one which fits this topic. Scared Shrekless. Why has all the Shrek been scared out of me? Am I sans Shrek now? The point is, this ogre of the swamp outclasses all who have come before and after him if you look at our own internal biases, getting him number 1 on this spooky list. Now, what did you think? Were all these monsters swampy enough for you, or were they a bit too clean? And who are some of your favorite swamp monsters, whether we discussed them or not? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, happy Halloween, and we will see you in the next video.